Star Trek. Worf's hardest mission has nothing to do with the Klingon or Starfleet. Worf is about to embark on his hardest Star Trek mission yet, but it has nothing to do with the Klingons or Starfleet. Worf and his son Alexander have had a tense relationship. Alexander feels Worf failed him as a father, and in many ways he is correct. Now in Star Trek Defiance 22, Worf is undertaking a mission of a personal nature to reconcile with Alexander. Star Trek Defiant #22 is written by Christopher Cantwell and drawn by Angel Unzueta. The issue kicks off a new storyline, No Old Warriors, and begins with Alexander starting the QV rite. This ritual helps errant Klingons restore their honor. Worf is overseeing Alexander's QV. The rite is grueling, and in this issue, Alexander fights two members of his extended family in intense combat. Worf, the Enterprise's Klingon security chief, is one of the Star Trek franchise's richest characters, having appeared in more Trek media than any other actor. Originally intended to be written off Star Trek, The Next Generation's first season after a few episodes, Worf would go on to become one of the franchise's best-developed characters. The drama surrounding Worf's family and their struggle against the House of Duras not only formed the basis for some of The Next Generation's best episodes, but also gave fans in-depth looks at Klingon culture. Worf's personal and family lives also provided material for some of Star Trek's best stories. Worf's Klingon family was murdered when he was a small child, and he was taken in by humans. Growing up on Earth, Worf struggled to fit in with a society that had been at war with his people just a few decades prior. Worf sought solace in Starfleet and eventually made his way to the Enterprise, where he worked his way up to security chief. He eventually transfers to Deep Space Nine before returning to captain the Enterprise, as revealed in Picard. It was during Worf's first tenure on the Enterprise that he would become a father. During The Next Generation's second season, Worf meets and falls in love with Kellier, a half-human, half-Klingon woman. She gave birth to Alexander shortly after, but was later killed. Alexander was sent to Worf's adopted family on Earth, but he proved too much for the elderly couple, and he came to live on the Enterprise. Worf, unprepared to be a father, struggled in the role. Worf was still grappling with being a child of two worlds, and was unable to provide for Alexander emotionally. Worf's failures as a parent have haunted him. When Alexander was living on the Enterprise, he often got into trouble in school with his peers. Worf tried to provide guidance to his son, but came up short. Worf, perhaps sensing he missed out on the Klingon experience by being raised by humans, tries to instill in Alexander Klingon beliefs, telling the boy stories of Kallus, the founder of modern Klingon society. Nothing seemed to stick, and in time Alexander and Worf would part ways again. Eventually, Alexander joins the Klingon Defense Force. IDW Star Trek comics have not let up on Worf. Worf has been front and center in IDW's line of Star Trek comics since the line was relaunched in late 2022, and once again, his family life has reared its head. Kallus II, the cloned Klingon Emperor, began assembling a cult to help him in his crusade against the galaxy's godlike beings, and Alexander was one of his recruits. Kallus manipulated the boy into fighting his father, as seen in Star Trek Day of Blood. Alexander, who has struggled with feelings of alienation his whole life, was an easy target for Kallus' machinations. The dim glow of the Enterprise's observation deck cast long shadows across Worf's face as he stared out into the endless void of space. He had fought in wars, battled enemies of the Federation, and upheld the honor of the Klingon Empire. But none of those challenges prepared him for the mission that now lay before him, a mission that neither Starfleet nor the Klingon High Council could assist with. Fatherhood. Alexander Rozhenko, Worf's son, had always been an enigma to him. Born of his union with Kellier, Alexander was raised on Earth, away from the rigid traditions of the Klingon people. He had shown little interest in the ways of the warrior, preferring the comforts of human culture over the relentless pursuit of honor. Worf had always assumed that the boy's path would naturally align with his own, but now, as he faced the undeniable truth, he realized that understanding his son was the most difficult battle he had ever fought. It had been years since Worf had truly spent time with Alexander. Duty and honor had always come first. But now, stationed on Deep Space Nine, he saw an opportunity to reconnect. When he received word that Alexander had been assigned to the station for temporary duty, Worf knew this was his chance to bridge the gap that had formed between them. When Alexander arrived, Worf saw immediately that the young man, was no longer the child he had once tried to mold into a warrior. Alexander's uniform was that of a Starfleet officer, but his posture, his demeanor, lacked the rigid discipline Worf valued so highly. His son was confident but casual, and there was an undeniable tension in the air when they greeted each other. "Father," Alexander said, his tone respectful but distant. Worf nodded. "Alexander, it is good to see you." There was silence between them, the kind that stretched too long and said too much. Over the next several weeks, Worf struggled with the reality of who Alexander had become. He watched as his son befriended Ferengi traders, laughed with Bajoran officers, and even found joy in holodeck programs that had nothing to do with battle or honor. Worf did not understand him, and it pained him more than any wound he had suffered in combat. One evening, as they sat together in Worf's quarters, the tension finally boiled over. "You disapprove of me," Alexander said suddenly, setting his drink down with a sharp clink. Worf stiffened. "That is not true," Alexander scoffed. "Come on, father. You wanted me to be a warrior, a Klingon. Instead, I chose Starfleet. I chose a different path." Worf inhaled deeply, steadying himself. "It is not that I disapprove. It is that I do not understand." Alexander's eyes softened. "Then maybe you should try." Those words struck Worf like a batleth to the chest. All his life, he had sought to uphold the traditions of his people, to fight for honor and glory. But here, in this quiet moment, he realized that true strength was not in battle alone. It was in listening, in understanding, in accepting that there were paths beyond his own. And so Worf tried. He joined Alexander for a holodeck program that had nothing to do with war. He sat with him at Quarks, engaging in conversation about human literature and philosophy. He let go, little by little, of the belief that only the Klingon way was the right way. It was not easy. It went against everything he had been taught. But for the first time in his life, Worf realized that the hardest battles were not fought with weapons, but with the heart. One evening, as they stood together on the promenade, watching the stars beyond the station's force field, Alexander turned to his father with a small smile. "I think I finally get you, father." Worf nodded, feeling something shift within him. "And I am beginning to understand you, my son." For Worf, this was the hardest mission of all. But it was also the most important. And for the first time, he was ready to face it. Successfully created text document Worf hardest mission, which will be referenced in all future messages with the unique identifier text ID 67EN9864F81919BD6E2, a 3,805,954. "You disapprove of me," Alexander said suddenly, setting his drink down with a sharp clink. Worf stiffened. "That is not true." Alexander scoffed. "Come on, father. You wanted me to be a warrior, a Klingon. Instead, I chose Starfleet. I chose a different path." Worf inhaled deeply, steadying himself. "It is not that I disapprove. It is that I do not understand." Alexander's eyes softened. "Then maybe you should try." Those words struck Worf like a batleth to the chest. All his life, he had sought to uphold the traditions of his people, to fight for honor and glory. But here, in this quiet moment, he realized that true strength was not in battle alone. It was in listening, in understanding, in accepting that there were paths beyond his own. And so Worf tried. He joined Alexander for a holodeck program that had nothing to do with war. He sat with him at Quarks, engaging in conversation about human literature and philosophy. He let go, little by little, of the belief that only the Klingon way was the right way. It was not easy. It went against everything